Hi, welcome to the podcast. I've finished reading Sallust's Conspiracy, Catiline Conspiracy and the Jugurthine War, and I have now a good sense of his style and why he's an important figure, and I want to share it with you, my loyal viewers and listeners. I'm also back from vacation. I'm kind of sunburnt. It's like dark out, so the camera's no good because my other one doesn't work at nighttime, and I wanted to get you some content. But also, let me quickly do a little reflecting on the direction of the channel before I get to Sallust. I've recently posted a couple of short impromptu literary reflection videos, and I'm checking the meter to see how they're doing. The long-form video lecture series is something I believe in and I like doing because it helps me learn. That is, like this kind. And so I'm going to keep doing it, but I may start sprinkling in some less formal and more rough draftish videos along the way. The intention is not to water down the quality, and I'll try to keep pace for the big lectures, the 45-minute ones. But this should be something for you to chew on in between. Sometimes, reading some poems or short excerpts, sometimes just spitballing. The other thing I want to say is, honestly, I've just been basically avoiding public places for the past year. For me, it's been like a confluence of things. I got fired, I've had some health troubles, but mainly it was the COVID health protocols that was sort of just keeping me home. I was hoping to outlast it all. I hadn't even worn a mask until this week when I finally had to stop at a gas station to pee, and they wouldn't let me in unless I put a mask on. Guys, what is going on? What is going on? I mean, people, and I don't mean elites. I mean like random, almost like homeless people walking around downtown in Savannah on the side of the road, nowhere within 100 feet of anyone, just out for a walk, are wearing masks. Like, what the heck is going on? Do you remember like fresh air? Remember that? What is going on? How is this going to end? Anyway, so that's what I was thinking about while I was reading Sallust. So let's just do the Sallust stuff. This book, this is the Oxford World's Classics version, includes two works and part of a third, but the main ones are the Catiline Conspiracy and the Jugurthine War. I'm sort of going to wander through them in whatever order feels helpful, so I'll kind of clarify which work I'm talking about. In just a very brief historical context and biography note here. This guy, Sallust, was born in 86 BC and died in 35 BC. He came from a plebeian family, but he rose to significant heights of political prominence before retiring to write and reflect on all that he had witnessed. His perspective is what you might call, or what I call, I guess, high republican, in the sense that he is witnessing the shift toward imperial and even degenerate attitudes, but he is clinging himself to the old ways. He shares this attitude with Polybius, although Polybius precedes him by about 100 years. There is an interesting subfield in classical history where people will try to pinpoint the beginning of moral decline in Rome, and these guys tend to put it somewhere around 146 BC. And also here, I want to show one of my favorite paintings of all time. It is a fantastical portrait of a penitent Mary Magdalene by Rogier Van Der Weyden. Notice a couple of things. First of all, how Northern European she appears to be, which is fun. Secondly, as my friend The Truth Will Live taught me, almost always, Magdalene is depicted in paintings carrying a jar of oil. That's because she isn't named exactly in the scene in the Bible as Magdalene, in the scene I'm talking about. It is sort of tradition, but the idea is that she is the one who poured the expensive perfume and oil stuff on Jesus, where Judas says, like, why are you doing that? You could sell this and give it to the poor or something. And Jesus says, here I am with you. Let her do it. Shut up, Judas. But mostly, look at that tear falling from her eye. Zoom in. Guys, this is what we believe. No one is beyond saving. As they say at the Ash Wednesday service, repent and believe the gospel. Well, okay, why is this relevant? Because apparently Sallust did some iffy stuff in his youth. He tells us as much, but he also regrets it, and he puts his repentance down in writing. And all of this is important because some people think Sallust is a little too stiff in his judgment of the degeneracy and decadence he sees around him. I mean, man, have you guys been paying attention to any of this stuff on Twitter about the classics? Like, the classicists are at it again, and they are... It's like insufferable, these people. They want it to be, diverse. They want it to be egalitarian. It's like, it's so stupid. It really is just so stupid. And it's a psyop, and they don't even know that they're, like, useful idiots. But anyway, if they did read Sallust, they generally wouldn't like him. But I think he's really one of the good guys who learned from the errors of his ways and wants to warn those who might make similar moral mistakes. I was just driving through South Carolina, and I saw all of those Christian billboards saying things like, repent, sin has consequences. So this is what I was thinking about as I was reading this. So anyway, yeah, Sallust himself may not have been a saint, but before he died, he at least aspired to be one. Okay, first, let's talk about conspiracies. I remember hearing a couple of years ago that the CIA invented the term conspiracy theorist in the 1960s. And of course, by way of doing so, they pathologized any such thinking, basically to discourage people from dissenting from the mainstream narrative, which obviously was easier for them to control if, people were afraid of being called conspiracy theorists. Now, apparently, this story is itself incorrect, which makes it kind of a conspiracy theory, ironically. Well, whether it's true or not, the way the term functions now is, I think obviously, and here I'm quoting James Edward Rankin, PhD, about hegemonic control. That is, the existing powers that be do not want to have to compete with any dissident ideas. And so, it's helpful to them that the term conspiracy theorist exists to stigmatize anyone who questions the standard CNN narrative. And yet, demonstrably, as I'm about to relate you by way of Sallust, although there happen to be hundreds of equally well-documented examples we could cite from history, but the point is, conspiracies do happen. They happen. And when they happen, the conspiracy theorists are generally the first to recognize the deception that's occurring. Last spring, for example, as COVID phobia went mainstream, as everybody was learning Dr. Fauci's name and, respecting the experts, I made the paranoid conspiracy theorist point repeatedly to my family and some friends that, this pandemic might be real to some extent, but the political reaction is mainly about control. I told them the masks were about control, the vaccines would be mandatory, and conversations would become even more difficult. And maybe no one would ever even shake hands again. They'd all just be elbow bumping from now on. And to a person outside of my weird internet circle, they told me I was a conspiracy theorist. They told me 2 weeks to flatten the curve. They told me there would never be mandatory vaccines. And so on. well, maybe I haven't been precisely proven right, but my theory about a conspiracy looks more and more plausible. I mean, here we are at a year, still, it's getting to be ridiculous, and you do have to wonder, right? I mean, people are supposed to not, associate indoors very much anymore, and nobody really goes to work, and it makes these conversations more difficult. Okay, so that's the point. And, look, sometimes conspiracies happen. Like, there are bad guys who want more power or money or, esteem or prestige, and so they conspire. Sallust begins with a long prefatory essay lasting 5 or 7 pages, in which he laments the decline in Roman virtue that led to conditions which allowed for the conspiracy to take place. Let me just skim some of what I have underlined on these early pages from his prefatory remarks, really just hopping around on this page or so. So when Carthage, the rival to Roman power, had been eradicated, 146 BC, fortune began to grow cruel and confuse everything. Greed for money grew, then greed for power. People were taught to neglect the gods and to put a price on everything. Ambition forced many men to become liars, to hide one thing in their heart and to have something else ready on their tongue. At first, these things grew gradually. They were punished occasionally. Afterwards, when this contagion invaded like a plague, the state changed, and political power, which had been most just and best, became cruel and intolerable. Okay, this happened. Sulla let his army live contrary to the custom of our ancestors, in luxury and excessive license. He did this to make them faithful to his cause. The charming and voluptuous locales easily softened the ferocious spirits of the soldiers. The army of the Roman people grew accustomed to making love, drinking, admiring statues, plundering temples. After wealth began to be considered an honor, and after glory, political authority and power followed in its wake, manly virtue began to lose its luster. Poverty was considered a disgrace. Innocence was taken for malevolence. Today's men, the most worthless of human beings, in the most criminal way, they take from our allies everything which the bravest men had left when they were victorious. It is as if the ability to do injustice is what magisterial power really means now. Man, I mean, look, and again, if you're a classicist in an academic department voting Democrat like it's your religion, you don't even, to you, this is just like, I don't know, it's just like a historical curiosity. But if you're with me on this page, this is happening in America right now and relevant, right? Okay, so, and by the way, and here is where in the story Catiline himself enters. As Sallust describes him, he is almost comic book-like in his villainousness. His first move is to gather around him all the dregs of society. Quoting here, his companions and friends were those who had wrecked their patrimony with their hand, stomach, penis. All murderers and infidels anywhere, convicted in court or fearing prosecution for their deeds. Catiline especially sought out intimacy with young men. Their minds were still malleable and pliable and easily snared by his treachery. End quote. So that's the setup for the conspiracy that then happens. It does remind me a little bit of like Antifa and George Soros stuff, except that maybe Catiline sounds like he was more a man of the people than Soros. But anyway, the main action takes place in 64 and 63 BC. Basically, Catiline promised great rewards to anyone who would help him overthrow the government. And Sallust says over and over again, Rome was up for sale. So this dangling carrot of promised rewards appealed not only to the plebeian ruffians, but also to the elites, including a number of senators and aristocrats. Once the group pulled itself together, the idea was revealed. Basically, they would kill the consuls, seize the fasces, send Piso with an army to take possession of the two Spanish provinces. But this first stab at the conspiracy was discovered before they could pull it off, and so the plan sort of fell apart, or they called it off. But Catiline won't stop trying here, and so he gathers them together again. This time Sallust gives a speech, and it's recorded in that Thucydides-like style, like where it's quoted, but it's obviously imagined by Sallust. And he gets all these guys riled up again. This time, the second time, the plan involves, not just taking over the state, but like widespread arson, the murder of Cicero, and yes, like that Cicero, and a kind of pseudo-liberation of the slaves, at least so that they can help in the cause. Again, thanks in part to Cicero's cleverness, the plot was discovered at the last minute, but this time the populace heard reports of what happened. It terrified them. Gloom overcame all. They questioned everything. It's actually difficult to figure out exactly how civilians would have understood all of this, but there is this really interesting message sent from C. Manlius to Marcius Rex. Listen to this. Quote, "General, we call upon men and gods as our witnesses. We have not taken up arms against our country, and we intend no danger to others. Instead, our purpose is to keep our own bodies free from harm. We are humiliated, impoverished by the violence and cruelty of the money-lenders. Most of us have lost our fatherland, but all have lost fame and fortune. None of us has been allowed to enjoy legal protections according to ancestral custom. None has retained his personal freedom once he lost his patrimony. Such has been the savage indifference of the money-lenders and the urban praetor." So that gives you some sense of sort of what was causing all of the fractiousness within Rome at the time. But evidently, many of the plebs, evidently many of the plebs sided with Catiline and had been sympathetic supporters of the conspiracy. As Sallust understands all of this, this is kind of the death knell for decency in the Roman Republic. Again, this is in 64 or 63 BC. Quote, he says, quote, "To put the truth in a few words, after those times, whoever stirred up the Republic with honorable claims, some as if they were defending the rights of the people, others in order to secure the authority of the Senate, pretending to work for the public good, they struggled for their own power. There was no restraint of measure to their efforts. Each side used their victories brutally." What flipped the plebs, who had wanted revolution initially, seems to have been Catiline's targeting of Cicero, whom even the plebs loved. So when the second round of plotting was uncovered, they were this time joyful and happy, as if rescued from slavery, Sallust reports. Following the discovery of the plot, there are two really good speeches. The first is from Julius Caesar himself, who counsels the Senate against harsh punishment of the participants, of the conspirators. He says the last time Rome tried to exact revenge against insurgents, that action was only the beginning of even greater slaughter. If you're interested, he's referring to the strangulation of Damasippus ordered by Sulla. So Caesar urges restraint and forgiveness. But then Cato the Younger gives a speech calling instead for the strictest punishment possible. And in my opinion, his speech is more exciting and interesting, and it was more persuasive. The Senate actually listened to him finally in the end. He's the thumbnail for this episode, by the way. And this guy was truly, I did some reading on Cato the Younger, and truly like an interesting guy, a really interesting personality. It sounds like he was kind of a proto-Stoic, like a really, like he was concerned with morality, like to say the least. So I'm just going to quote again, just like I did before, some random quotes almost, my underlined sections here from the pages on Cato the Younger. But you should Google him and learn about him. So quoting here. He says, this is Cato speaking, "Men who have attempted war against their own fatherland, parents, altars, and hearths," that's who we're dealing with here. "If you do not act to prevent this crime, when it does occur, justice will be something you plead for but don't get. Wake up, at last, and take control of the state. We are not asking whether we should live with or without a moral compass, or about the size or magnificence of the empire of the Roman people, but whether this which is ours, however it seems to you, will remain ours, or will belong together with our own persons to the enemy." At this point, does anyone bring up compassion or mercy? Long ago, we lost the true names for things. Squandering the property of another is called largesse. Daring to do wicked things is called courage. And so the Republic is at the edge. By all means, let them be liberal with the wealth of our allies, since that's how our morals are. Let them be compassionate with thieves who take our treasure, but do not let them be generous with our blood, and while they spare few criminals, destroy all the truly good men. The more vigorously you act, the weaker will be their courage. If they see you hesitate only a little, immediately they will be upon us and they will be ferocious. There is a conspiracy. The most noble citizens have conspired to burn down the fatherland. Your inability to act, and your effeminate heart that makes you hesitate. Everyone waiting for someone else, trusting, of course, in the gods who have often saved this republic in times of great danger. But it is not with prayers and womanly entreaties that we earn the help of the gods. It is by being watchful, taking action, making good policy, that all things succeed. The enemy is in the heart of Rome. All right, so, awesome. And I disavow, but it's interesting. All right, so in all this, I forgot to mention, by the way, Catiline himself had slipped away. So while Cato is giving that speech, while Rome is discussing whether or not to punish those who had been caught in the conspiracy, Catiline himself was out rousing more than 2,000 men from the countryside and thinking about how to sack the city. Eventually, the Roman army went out and met him, and they did kill every last one of Catiline's men. But Sallust notes that not even one of Sallust's native-born men from his army was captured in battle or in flight. They all fought right to the end, which I guess at least speaks to their conviction, I suppose. The other work, the Jugurthine War, is just as good, maybe even better actually, but a little too complicated to try to summarize for you, so I'm just going to use it here to make some notes about why I think Sallust's work is so memorable and probably underappreciated, at least popularly. In this work, just as he did in the Catiline Conspiracy, Sallust starts out with a few pages, actually, of introductory remarks. These are really, really good, in my opinion. They're some of the best stuff that I've read to give you a feel for the mind of a 1st century BC Roman. Liberals must hate this part, actually, because Sallust clearly has a cogent moral worldview, and he speaks against the direction his society is going. Listen to how he begins the Jugurthine War. Quote, "It is wrong for humans to complain about human nature, speaking of frailty and saying that their short life is ruled rather by chance than merit. For, after careful forethought, you will discover that nothing else is greater, nothing more stable, and that it is more often the case that human nature is lacking in determined effort than in strength or time. But the leader and ruler of moral life is the rational soul, and when it proceeds toward glory down a path of manly virtue, it has more than enough power and potential to win fame and it does not need the help of chance. End quote. I mean, how great is this? I've always loved paragraphs like this in fiction. Like, I've often noted how sometimes Melville, or especially Hawthorne, just rarely, but like once every other chapter at the end of a paragraph, he'll give you like 3 or 4 essentially like interpretive sentences so that he's like making sure you're understanding what's going on. And that's what Sallust is doing here. Now, I mean, as I said, I've loved these in fiction. I am now a connoisseur of their appearance in history too. You hear me, Otto? You should start your next book with like a philosophical reflection. That's what this is, really. It's like lowercase p philosophy done very well, like authentically, and offered exactly where it's needed. Just briefly, but right where it's needed. Sallust frames the history that he's about to relate with these introductory remarks, and in doing so, he saves himself a ton of time later on in the narrative, because the effects of these remarks, these introductory remarks, is that we first get to know who the teller is. I mean, in a sense, my studies on narrative perspective come into focus here. We are not reading history as if it is an objective thing. All things are selected and like edited by someone. So, like, if Sallust is to be our escort through certain events, it is, in my judgment, good of him to sort of introduce himself. And he's not a shallow thinker. He talks about the dual nature of man, body and soul, and about our spiritual nature. He says that aspiring to political office and military power used to appeal to him, but at present time they are utterly undesirable. These sorts of observations are ultimately more important than telling me, where you're born and how many kids you have and what your job is and so on. And what the news, like what you think of the news. No, tell me what you think of the soul and what things motivate you and which inspire you and which disgust you. All this so that when you weave the narrative, I can begin to trust you and internalize it. Sallust says, quote, I am going to write about the war which the Roman people waged with the Numidian king Jugurtha. First, because it was great and brutal, with victories on both sides, and second, because that was the first time there was any opposition to the aristocracy's abuse of power. This struggle confused all things, human and divine, and proceeded to such a pitch of madness that political partisanship had its end in war and the devastation of Italy. See, for me at least, it sort of depends who is saying this stuff. Do you understand that? It's like, is he a reliable narrator, or is this, Howard Zinn, right? I don't think it is. I don't think Sallust is on the same page as Howard Zinn. He's coming from a totally different narrative perspective. He is a man who clearly is a reactionary, not just politically, but morally, deep in his character. He's a man who feels at odds with his epoch. And I think that shapes the way he tells history. In fact, of course, it probably shaped what history he decided to tell. And he shows us that he is aware of all of this by his occasional moral interjections. I love him for this. I mean, this is exactly the kind of stuff I just feel grateful that I got on this kick of reading the classics. And I've done all this, by the way, in about 2.5 years. What are you doing? What are you doing? These books, this book cost $11, and I don't know, you're not doing it. You should be doing it though. It's really good. It's good. It's not work. It's liberty. It's freedom. Anyway, as I said above, Sallust sort of pinpoints the beginning of the decline phase in the Republic at around 146 BC, which, if you watched my Polybius episode, that is when Carthage was finally destroyed. The end of foreign enemies seemed to mean that Rome sort of turned on itself. Listen to this paragraph, and this time, I guess in case you're sleeping, I mean, I'm trying to do a lot of I made this joke the other day about like how I feel like I have ESP with other people who have ESP, and they know it and I know it, and like we don't have to mention it much, but like, right? And what I mean is not actually, think of a shape and then name it. But what I mean is like, do you ever notice, like, I don't know if I'm able to do it or not. I do try to do it sometimes, but do you ever notice with other people, let's say, like, occasionally in your life, you just meet a person who seems to be able to, like, send signals at a level that's just a little different? It's like it has to do with the way they move their eyes. It can, or like choose their words very often. Sometimes it's the rhythm of their speech, like, it can be the way they lean in. It can be a lot of different things, the way they use their hands. But not maybe you're just not one of the chosen. You never noticed this. You're a dummy, or you don't have ESP or whatever. But if you're like me, occasionally you meet a person and they're able to like send these darts that sort of sub-linguistically. It's in the tone or their word choice or whatever. And it's just like for example, like if somebody uses the word degeneracy, I know they're a little tuned in. Nobody on the stupid woke left ever uses the term degeneracy because they're not aware of that. They're not even cognizant of it. And so like when someone signals you on that level, if they do it intentionally and you receive it intentionally, that is, they said it to see if, like, they used the term degeneracy to test you out, and you heard it and you wanted to like return the signal. And so you start talking about Cormac McCarthy or the end of the Roman Empire or something so that they know that you know. And now you guys are able to like, now you can talk at the realer level, right? That's an amazing thing. And I think Sallust is doing it. He's doing it, and he's a time traveler. Like, he's doing it through time. Can you imagine? So, okay, here's what he says. I'm just going to read you a little paragraph here. Before the destruction of Carthage, mutual consideration and restraint between the people and the Roman Senate characterized the government. Among the citizens, there was no struggle for glory or domination. Fear of a foreign enemy preserved good political practices. But when that fear was no longer on their minds, self-indulgence and arrogance, attitudes that prosperity loves, took over. As a result, the tranquility they had longed for in difficult times proved, when they got it, to be more cruel and bitter than adversity. For the aristocracy twisted their dignity, and the people twisted liberty towards their desires. Every man acted on his own behalf, stealing, robbing, plundering. In this way, all political life was torn apart between two parties, and the Republic, which had been our common ground, was mutilated. In general, this is what destroys great states. One group wants to overcome the other in any way possible, and then to take a bitter vengeance on the defeated. You guys, I mean, if this doesn't feel like it's relevant, I don't know what you're even watching this show for, because to me, this is like so 2021. And to read it, it's like, it makes the red alarm bells go off. Like, this matters. Anyway, okay. So that's Sallust. By the way, notice this book's not even very thick. Like, it's 120 pages or something. It's, like I said, $11. You can knock it out on a weekend, guys. It will make you a better thinker. So that's Sallust. If you're interested in how good republics go bad, and if you think a decline in morals is part of the story, and if you think that theorizing about conspiracies can't be all bad, and if you like good writing with interesting syntax and vivid details, Sallust is your guy. This Friday, we have a secret stream meeting. What should we talk about? I'm having some visionary ideas about Christianity again lately, and so I was thinking maybe we could talk about the merits of Protestantism, if that appeals to anyone. Because I do think it's ridiculous. It's gotten to the point of being like a stupid cliche now. It's getting embarrassing the way that I mean, and no offense, the thing is, you notice the Protestants never return fire, do they? And if they do, only very few people can even handle it. It's like all these ortho bros with their secret discords with Jay Dyer and stuff. But as soon as one Protestant goes, Holy Spirit energy, Melchizedek or whatever, they just they tell me about the arch, whatever he's called, the patriarch, said this or that. And it's like, shut up, I don't care. Okay, listen. So we can do that. We can even make fun of Roman Catholicism a little bit if you want, which, by the way, is off the rails. Have you heard how the Pope is holding some interreligious meeting with his fellow Abrahamics, which is the Jews and Muslims, at some ziggurat? I mean, what is going on, dude? That is the most pagan thing I've ever heard of in my life. And I know there are the Sita vacantists and the SSPX purists who are like, well, that's not real Catholicism, but that is your Pope and 99% of the people who call themselves Catholic. So anyway, we can talk about Christianity on the stream if you want. I was watching Neuroposter did an interview with Jay Dyer the other day, and one of the things Jay said, to be serious, I mean, I like Jay actually, and one of the things he said that I liked was that revelation ultimately precedes sort of everything. And so, we can reason together. But when revelation comes, it's actually higher than reason, right? And I think that's an important part of the story. And it may be what Protestantism thinks it's doing. So maybe we can pick on it if we want. But anyway, we'll see. I'll post a thing on Patreon tomorrow for those of you who are already signed up. And if you haven't, the Patreon link is in the description of this video. And this is the outro music. I like all of you guys for listening to any of this stuff. It's amazing to me that you do. And I mean, I feel like we carry the fire, guys. We win in the end because we show up and we learn the stuff. Bye-bye.